Parents are given enormous discretion in how they raise their kids. Once they take them home, they can pretty much decide however they want how to teach the kids, how to feed the kids, at least for the first few years before the state starts looking in again. But where should the line be drawn? Because in Italy right now, some parents' dietary decisions that they're making for their babies are landing them in the hospital. One baby in particular was taken to the hospital by his grandparents a week ago, and doctors were shocked to see the poor state of the baby's health and a body weight only just slightly higher than a newborn. Blood tests revealed the child was severely malnourished with calcium levels barely adequate to survive. The baby was also suffering from a congenital heart condition which required emergency surgery. And one of the doctors there said, "It is not a problem to choose different or unusual kinds of nutrition, and we certainly do not want to enter into a discussion of the merits of the decision. But since birth, the baby should have had support in this case with calcium and iron." He doesn't want to enter into a discussion about this, but Cenk and I will.
Yes. So first off, I'm not a big fan of the vegan diet. Just laying out my perspective here. I think that a third of the food, and I'm being generous, tastes like sawdust to me. Okay. And I'm a big meat eater, and I'm not proud of it. That's a lie. I kind of am. But okay.
You're proud of it?
Yeah, but some of my best friends are vegan. And some Young Turks hosts are vegan, and so much
Certainly
love to them.
editors.
And in all honesty, I think they're better people than I am. I really do. They care about the environment, they care about the world, they care about those animals, and those are good traits, not bad traits. Now, in this case, should you make sure that your kids have enough nutrition, no matter what your philosophy around veganism is? Of course. But I actually believe that they're being a little sensationalistic here. So first off, the kid also had, as you pointed out, John, a congenital heart condition. That might have a lot to do with it. And so,
maybe it was caused by the veganism. I don't think that
so.
it was.
I don't think that's a real thing. Okay. And then secondly, as John's about to tell you, there's a lot of hype around this, particularly in Italy. So it would be a curious thing if there's all these malnourished vegan babies in other countries, but all the other countries didn't give a damn about it. But the Italians are the only ones who care. Or, now there's a couple of different options here, or maybe there are more vegans in Italy, which actually sounds like it is the case, because they say it's about maybe 2.8% of Italians have now become vegan, which I'm amazed by.
Yeah.
So that might be part of the answer. The other part of the answer might be is that there's a little bit of hysteria because of that in Italy.
Yes.
So they're finding cases and attributing things that maybe they shouldn't attribute.
Yes, that's entirely possible. So we do know 4 children have been hospitalized within the last 18 months, and a malnourished toddler spent several days in intensive care in a Genoa hospital last month, which of course means that in a country as large as Italy, 4 people is not a lot. It's certainly not a high percentage. It's 4 people, so it does matter. In any child, if we feel like their parents are sort of intentionally putting them in harm's way, or at the very least not doing what's necessary to save them, that bothers us, which is why very often we'll cover the stories of the Christian scientists and stuff like that not giving life-saving medicine to their children. It's not a huge number of cases, but every case matters, and every once in a while you want to shine light on it.
Yeah, so I think probably the old guard in Italy, which cares a lot about eating, right? Everybody's got different cultures, and Italy has a culture that really, really values their cuisine and their eating as a part of life, is probably annoyed by now a growing percentage of Italy that are vegan. Now, there's no reason to be. To each his own. I think that people who are vegans are fantastic, right? So, it's not for me. If I become a vegan, something terrible has happened in my life. I have some sort of heart condition that I have to eat sawdust on a regular basis. There's no other way. So it's not for me, but I'm being a dick about it. I'm being honest. And I think that people who are vegan are great. But some people feel like, no, if you're against the old ways, I fight you.
Yeah.
So as I
true.
read this story, I got a sense of a little undue hysteria in Italy. So just calm down, everybody. Take a deep breath. Yes, of course, you've got to give your kids the right nutrition. There's no question about that. But I would be very surprised if a higher percentage of vegans were guilty of that than the regular population. I bet you, if 2.8% of vegans in Italy, 2.8% of Italians are vegan, and only 4 kids are brought into a hospital and they're all paying attention to this, how many non-vegan kids were brought into the hospital? You see what I'm saying? For malnourishment.
Possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think, look, I think it's perfectly fine, philosophy aside, the human body needs different things at different stages of its development. And what you as an adult pair have chosen to eat might sustain you. You're not a nutritionist, you don't know in the long run, but it might sustain you in the short run. That doesn't mean that's what a baby needs. Babies obviously have very different needs in terms of the amount of fat that they need. The brain to develop literally needs a certain amount of fat. And if you're eating a diet that's mostly vegetables and stuff like that, you're probably not getting that. And so it can be fine to say, I want to encourage my child to be a vegan when they're old enough, maybe when they can make conscious decisions on their own. But any sort of diet that hasn't been shown to nurture a growing child, I would probably back off from it.
I totally agree.
And I'm an expert on this because I have a diet that does not nurture human growth.
Okay.
I am dying right now.
But that's exactly what I was going to add. But that requires an actual analysis, and that requires data. We don't have that at this time. We don't know if the vegan diet is actually leading to malnourishment for kids.
I bet there's
so don't make those assumptions.
Yeah.
But if science comes in on that, then be open to that science, obviously. So you want to make sure obviously that your kids are okay. That's why as soon as my kids could eat anything, I immediately force-fed them bacon.
I don't want them to be malnourished. Yeah, and I will say I do agree with you on the point about I'm not a vegan. I'm not even a vegetarian now, although I have been at various points. Mostly laziness. I do think that they're better people. I think anyone who can exercise even a smidgen of self-control over what they eat is a far better person than me because I have a very hard time with it.
You know what I had for
Especially
lunch?
sugar. I just can't. What?
I had an Italian sub, and it was fucking delicious.